In this episode of The Last of Us, I think there's a couple nods to another famous character that Nick Offerman has played, that being
I'm Ron Swanson.
The first being where we see him sitting and eating steak, looking at security monitors. Now this in and of itself doesn't look like anything special, but this scene also looks suspiciously a lot like another scene from Parks and Recreation where Leslie has given him his perfect birthday. He's sitting in front of TV monitors, eating steak, watching something he loves. In the case of Parks and Recreation, he's watching his favorite movie, Bridge Over the River Kwai, and in the show, he's watching security monitors where infected continue to fall into his traps.
It doesn't get old.
Another Easter egg being when he goes into Home Depot and looks like a kid in a candy store, where likewise in Parks and Recreation when he goes into Lowe's, he's also a kid in a candy store, except there's people there where he must tell the first person that comes to try to help him.
I know more than you.
And also, we never find out Bill's last name. So I like to think in my headcanon it's Bill
Swanson,
cousin of Ron Swanson.
Doesn't get old.
Probably among the most disturbing events to happen in episode 3 of HBO's The Last of Us is at the beginning of the episode where Ellie finds some sort of bunker or storage access in the convenience store that her and Joel enter. Now at first glance this may make Ellie appear a bit macabre or sadistic, but I think there's a deeper meaning to this. One of the questions that underpin both the show and game of The Last of Us is whether the infected have some sort of sentience or maintain something of their past. Now at first glance this appears to be obviously disturbing, but also it's Ellie trying to figure out the new world she has found herself in. She's trying to figure out whether the infected maintain their sentience, because she is after all infected. She's immune, but she's infected. So she's trying to determine whether the other infected have some sort of self-awareness like she does. One of the similarities between this episode and the game is how we first meet Bill. In the game, we first meet Bill after you've fallen into one of his traps. He shows up masked and offers some help.
Get off your ass and on your feet.
Thanks for the heroics and all.
In the show, the first time we see Bill's face is after he's just unmasked himself, after the Fedra soldiers have left. Now, there's nothing profound to point out here except that I think it's cool. Something else I mentioned in one of my shorts for episode 2 is a hint at Ellie's love for space and how she mentions the crater holes in Boston looking like the moon. Well, in this episode, we also get a hint. The first being that she talks about how she loved to fly and how lucky Joel was to be able to fly.
Dude, you got to go up in the sky.
And the second being how she talks about the inside of the S10 looking like a spaceship.
First time in a car?
It's like a spaceship.
More and more breadcrumbs continue to pile up as we look towards that eventual payoff where we see Ellie's love for space and space travel. Though there are many cases where we see the TV show of The Last of Us matching some of the clothing choices in the video game, there have also been places where the show has matched the show internally. From episode 3, the best example of this is the shirt we see Frank wearing while him and Bill are fighting after Frank has joined Bill in Lincoln is also the same shirt we see Joel wearing at the end of the episode after Joel and Ellie have showered and changed clothes before they get ready to depart Lincoln. Another prominent change from the game to the show is how Ellie comes about getting a pistol. In the game, she gets a pistol in a very different way and in a very different circumstance, but here we see her get a pistol that turned out to be Frank's pistol from earlier in the episode. Now, this may not appear to be much of anything at all, and it may not have a payoff, but I think in later episodes we may see Ellie confess to having that gun and give it up to Joel as a sign of her trust in him. One of the most popular criticisms I've heard leveled at Bill is how he responds whenever Frank first approaches his compound. He starts off very skittish, but he quickly accepts Frank into his home, he quickly provides him a meal, and then he quickly proceeds to go even further and they become lovers. Now, on the surface, this appears to be quite suspect, but you have to understand that even though Bill, who is a hardened survivalist that was prepared for this, was not prepared for prolonged periods of time without human contact. We see him here after 4 years of no human contact, desperately craving some sort of interaction. Nick Offerman's acting here is brilliant because we can see him fighting every instinct he has to make this guy leave, but also he wants him to stay because he is so desperate for some sort of interaction, some sort of contact. And I think it makes the episode even that much more saddening. One of the most pronounced changes from the game is the song that they listen to as they leave Lincoln. In the game, we see Ellie and Joel listening to Hank Williams.
That is a winner, though.
In the show, we see them listening to Linda Ronstadt and playing the song that was featured earlier in the episode. Now, on the surface, there is no connection between these two, but I think there's an interesting coincidence that I thought needed to be noted. Hank Williams Jr., which is obviously Hank Williams' son, once wrote a song entitled If You Don't Like Hank Williams. Now, the interesting thing about this is who's mentioned and the placement of who's mentioned in the song. The verse goes like this.
I'm in love with Linda Ronstadt. Anybody that don't like Hank Williams, they can kiss our ass.
This is certainly something that was not planned out by the showrunners, but I thought it to be an interesting coincidence that of all the songs and all the peoples that could have been picked to replace Hank Williams' son sang a song mentioning both artists right next to each other. Just an interesting coincidence.